The 1816 directions for using Maelzel's metronome is one of the most important, if not the most important source on the use of the metronome. It's also the first source my dear single beating friends throw at me in the comment sections of my channel to prove that obviously I am wrong in all I'm saying. For them, this text is clearly proving the metronome was intended to be used as we use it today. But is that the case? Let's have a close look together on this unique text and see what we can learn. It will be a somewhat longer episode, but I promise you that after this video you'll have a crystal clear understanding on what this text really is about. So welcome everybody to Authentic Sound. My name is Wim Winters and this channel is all about exploring the music from Bach to Beethoven and beyond, with the single goal to inspire you on your journey as a musician or as a music lover. Historical sources are definitely a part of the never-ending fascinating journey of trying at least to reconstruct the original idea of the composer. In that journey, the metronome often is set aside as a boring machine that many of us have bad memories of from our earliest piano lessons. We forget, however, that tempo, as personal the choice might be and also is, dictates all other layers of a performance. Changing the tempo even slightly is changing everything. So, in this light, how lucky are we having thousands of tempo indications given by the musicians we still care about today? When we put the slider of our metronome to 138, we hear a sound in the fourth dimension, that of time, that connects us directly to Beethoven's own session of the Hammerklavier Sonata, where exactly the same device was conducting, so to say, in this piece in the same tempo. It is our responsibility as to decide what we do with that information. One thing is sure, closer than this we'll never get. As the metronome was brought to a kind of mass production by Maelzel in 1815, the device, under the hands of the brilliant marketeer Maelzel, soon would be used worldwide as a standard for indicating the tempi composers wanted their pieces to be performed in. We will make separate episodes in which we will show that there was no exception in the idea that a metronome number was an accurate, exact speed indication that the composer really wanted you to take into account. We might think today otherwise, but that doesn't change anything to what was factually the case almost 2 centuries ago. So, the text we're discussing here was published in July 1816 in the Times and Morning Chronicle in London. Often Maelzel is named as the author, what could be true, but in fact this text is unsigned. Maelzel, however, did not reject the content of it either. Important to note is that this text was translated into German almost wordly in 1817, published by a gentleman named Franz Sales Kandler. That gives the unique situation in which terms can be checked in both languages as to understand 100% sure what their true meaning is. We will make another episode on the German translation later, but let's focus here on the English text. The text opens with a general description of the device. The essential part starts under the subtitle Directions to the Composer, how to find and indicate the time intended for any new movement. So, let's break this text down together. I will show the text on screen, we'll read large excerpts, and just pause the video if you'd like to read the full text yourself first. It will be also shown in the twin blog post to this video on my website, link below in the description box. The first paragraph describes the simple fact that the higher the rod is placed, the slower the vibrations will go and vice versa. Nothing new here. The second paragraph learns us the fact that the numbers on the scale are a reference to the number of beats per minute. That is obvious to us, but was kind of new at the time. The pendulum, in essence a simple rod with a weight, was known already much longer, but gives the length of the rope only, resulting in a swinging speed. We recalculate these resulting speeds today in metronome numbers or swings per minute, but that of course is not what you need when using a pendulum. The reference to the minute was also one of the elements Maelzel got criticized for by Gottfried Weber, who was very known at the time for his Fadenpendel. Anyways, not too important for what we want to learn today, but be it that the last element of this paragraph makes something clear that refers to exactly a point of discussion, since the metronome is given a scale referring to the minute. The text says a simple stopwatch can show the correctness of the device. It has been my point for a long time. If the metronomes of Beethoven and let's say Schumann really would have been broken, the level of intelligence of both men might be questionable. And more than that, all metronomes of those decades must have been broken, and broken in exactly the same way, since all those metronome numbers perfectly line up with each other. In other words, there is not too much of a difference between a Beethoven allegro and a Chopin allegro. The third paragraph is simply saying that doubling the number of the scale doubles the speed. Again, obvious to us, 50 is half as slow as 100. But not to the users of the pendulum, since doubling the length of a pendulum, and remember, the length is so to say the scale of the pendulum, does not result in a tempo relationship of 1 to 2. The important thing here is to realize the author speaks to composers and to composers who are used to the pendulum and its usage. We'll come back to the importance of this context later. Now we come to the essential parts of the text. The author now points to different elements that we will break down one by one, but keep in mind that he focuses on the example of a normal in the sense of a notation, a normal allegro around which he will build his practical example. In paragraph 4, we read that the composer is best able to judge if the time should be marked by minims, crotchets, quavers, etc. So, the time is marked by a note value, which should not surprise us. We are all familiar with the metronome indications of, for instance, half note 80. The half note, as we read in this text, is the indication of the time, the tempo. The nature of the movement, as we read, decides which note value best is taken to indicate the time. As we will see also in future episodes, this correlates to the use of note values and harmonies in the composition. But this is not the focus here. The author of the text gives a rule of thumb, saying that, and I quote, "Generally speaking, it will be found that in adagios it's most convenient to mark the time on the metronome by quavers, in andantes by crotchets, in allegros by minims, and in prestos by whole bars." End of quote. Since a normal allegro movement will be used as an example in paragraph 5, it is important to note that in normal practice, as written here, the time of an allegro is indicated by a half note. Now comes an interesting sentence, and I quote, "As often, however, as the case may admit of so doing, it is desirable that the pendulum should be made to strike integral parts of a bar, just as a master would beat or count the time. In 4/4, 3/4, and 2/4 time, the rod should, whenever possible, beat quarter notes or a crotchet. In 8-note time, whenever possible, the 8 notes." End of quote. Remember these two rules of thumbs we have here already. 1. The time of an allegro movement is generally indicated by half notes. 2. In a 4/4 time signature, the metronome ticks each quarter note. Keep this in mind, we'll come back to that later. Paragraph 5 connects the previous statements by the opening words, "this being premised." And so the text goes. I quote, "This being premised, suppose a composer desires to time a movement in 4/4 time, which according to the present system would be called an allegro. Let the weight, by way of trial, be placed against number 80, and 2 or 3 bars of the movement be played to ascertain whether at that number each beat falls in with the degree of quickness desired for 1 minim or 2 crotchets." End of quote. Well, this is strange. Weren't we supposed to have the metronome tick the quarter notes in a 4/4 time signature? Let's look at this sentence again. I quote, in 4/4, 3/4, 2/4 time, the rod should, whenever possible, beat quarter notes or crotchets. But suddenly, we are not looking anymore for the speed of those quarter notes, but the metronome beats the quickness desired for 1 minim. So here we have a real problem, at least for the single beat believers. Let's summarize this once again. 1. The time of an allegro is indicated generally by half notes. 2. The metronome is set in a way that in 4/4 time signature the rod beats the quarter note. And 3. With this in mind, in the text this being premised, if the metronome is set at 84 for an allegro, the pendulum beats the minim. It's not hard to understand that the metronome in a 4/4 time signature cannot align both the quarter notes and the half notes with each single tick. So the text is either contradicting itself in a way even that the whole document becomes rather worthless, or we do not see subtle nuances that are clearly present, but from our today's standpoint is overlooked. So what are we missing? 1. In the 4/4, the rod beats the quarter note. 2. In the 4/4, the pendulum beats the minim. Let's compare this with the German translation of Kandler 1817. 1. Im Viervierteltakt würde das Schlagwerk Viertelnoten schlagen. 2. Im Viervierteltakt, auf welchem der Pendel die halbe Note genau in dem Grade der Geschwindigkeit schlägt. Again, we will focus on this translation in a future episode, but for the sake of our English text, the German text is too important not to involve already now in the understanding of the English text. We first of all see that the misprint is out of question, because the German text exactly copies the English version. The only possibility, or the only possible explanation for the at first sight obvious contradiction is to be found in the exact understanding of the term beat, or in German Schlag. As the historical meaning for Schlag goes back to the mensural time where the tempo or takt of a semibrevis was given by 1 Schlag, in many sources clearly described as the arm or hand of the leading musician going up and down, a fact even not debated by Klaus Mieling, by the way. If this text is taken seriously, the beats of the rod must be meant as single beats or ticks. Remember the sentence, and I quote, "The pendulum should be made to strike integral parts of a bar, just as a master would beat or count the time." End of quote. This is a typical description also to the metronome of its single beat use. Every tick represents a part of the intended time, as you indeed would conduct a piece while you're practicing. But the general outcome of the rod beating these parts result in the pendulum beating the minims, where beat means a full swing of the pendulum. In other words, the rod going from left to right indicates the quarter notes in our example. The metronome as a whole beats, schlagt, the time, in Italian the tactus, and therefore giving the time as represented by the note value of our metronome equation. So, in a 4/4 allegro, the time is indicated in half notes, the tick represents the quarter note, and the full swing gives the minims. It reflects wonderful the description Gottfried Weber gives in 1814. The pendulum both gives the takt and the taktteilen. That this doubtlessly is the correct and only reading of this precise text is shown in the last sentence, a sentence that often is served as the golden argument for single beat use of the metronome, but when read correctly, exactly means the opposite. Let's read it together, and I quote, "It being well understood that in this case, as in every other case, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time, and is to be counted as such, but not the 2 beats produced by the motion from one side to the other." End of quote. If your single goal, no pun intended here, is to only read sources from a standpoint of backwards proving your point, you will only focus on the terms single beat and further on the words not the 2 beats. After which you will write lengthy comments as if it is obviously and case is closed. But let's step away for a moment from any context of 2018 and see what the sentence actually means. The every case is important, as we will see soon. But for now, it means there is no exception to the situation in which, and I quote, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time. End of quote. So, what is the intended time actually? That is not too hard to figure out. As we read in paragraph 4, the time is marked by a certain note value. Since this text is about the use of a metronome, it should not be too hard to understand that the intended time is nothing more than the note value in the metronome mark, and what else than the metronome mark can be meant by intended time. Let's reread the same sentence again and notice how you will see the context totally different now. I quote, "It being well understood that in this, as in every other case, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time." End of quote. So now the focus shifts to the term part. Part of the intended time. If time is given by the composer in the note value of the metronome mark, and every single beat or tick forms a part of that, then this sentence can only mean that every tick of the metronome gives a part of the note value of the metronome mark. And now the contradiction slowly evaporates. In the example of half note 84, each single tick gives part of the intended time, meaning the quarter notes, perfectly in line with what we thought was a contradiction. The very last sentence proved this again correct. Let's read the last sentence again, and I quote, "It being well understood that in this as in every other case, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time and is to be counted as such, but not the 2 beats produced by the motion from one side to the other." End of quote. Why is that additional sentence necessary? Remember still the opening words of this sentence, and I quote, "that in this case, as in every other case." Why the emphasis that this, namely the fact that every tick forms a part of the intended time, is true in every case? That becomes immediately clear when taking into account the practice of the pendulum. As you might possibly not know, one of the main disadvantages of the pendulum is the length of the rope. Beating in seconds, one needs already a length of a meter. But for tempi even slower, the rope becomes much longer than that. So it was common practice for slow movements in case of a pendulum to have 2 single swings for each part of the intended time. Exactly that what you should never do with the metronome anymore. The unique design with 2 weights made it possible to give almost all speeds, also the slow ones, in a device that was relatively small. The doubling of pendulum numbers was common practice. Let me give you 2 examples. An early example of that practice we find in the important 18th century book by Jacques-Alexandre de La Chapelle, Les vrais principes de musique, published in Paris in 1737. Exactly in the case of very slow tempi, de La Chapelle suggests of taking 2 vibrations as one. I don't have a facsimile of that source, but I quote from Lawrence Guardian's book. Il suffira de mettre une barre au-dessus du chiffre par lequel on connaîtra qu'il faut 2 vibrations pour faire un ton. End of quote. Meaning, it is enough to put a quarter note on top of the number by which one knows that you'll have to count 2 vibrations for 1 ton. This is a practice that still in 1887 was done. We read the same thing, for instance, in a patent Richard Zwecker registered for his metronome. Nothing more than a pendulum with a normal scale referring to the minute. Let's read the passage together and you'll learn why context is key in understanding historical sources and not what you or I would like to read. I quote, H represents a double scale, which shows the number of vibrations of the weight G in a minute for different lengths of the pendulum. Thus, when the index D points to the top numbers 80, 40, the pendulum is at full length and indicates 80 vibrations counting the falls in one direction only, or 40 vibrations counting the falls in both directions as one. End of quote. Read now our last sentence again and sit down firmly. I quote, "It being well understood that in this as in every other case, each single beat or tick forms a part of the intended time and is to be counted as such, but not the two beats produced by the motion from one side to the other." End of quote. So, how simple can it be? The instructions warned against what was common practice with the pendulum. Again, the short rod made possible by two weights was a genius invention that we may take for granted today, but provided a machine in those days that made very slow and very rapid movements possible in a relatively small device. On top of that, it delivered always the exact indication of the parts, never forget this anymore, of the intended time, and thus indicated metrically, hence the name metronome, the intended time altogether. Looking forward to your reactions and discussion in the comment section, as I can imagine this will open new thoughts. I will do my best to participate where I can if time allows. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for watching and reflecting with me on this fascinating subject. If you want to see more of this, then hit that subscribe button, also the bell icon next to the subscription button, and if you really want to push us all the way to keep going, you might want to become a patron for Authentic Sound and join a group of about 80 other supporters. We have monthly video calls in which we chat about anything and also tempo. Thank you for watching and see you soon again. Bye.